Hello and welcome to Meet a Columban. I'm Fr Jim Mulroney and my guest for this segment is Fr Peter O'Neill, who for about 26 years of his 30 years of priesthood has been working in Taiwan, primarily as a support person and working in support centres for overseas migrant workers who have come to the country. Now, overseas migrant work is a fairly unstable position. Very often people come, they have debts when they arrive, quite substantial debts. Their visas are tied to their workplace, and it's quite easy for them to find themselves either unemployable because of injury or maybe because of abuse on the workplace, and much support is needed. And Peter worked at the Hope Workers Centre for Migrant Workers in Taipei, and during that time he experienced, I think, what we're experiencing in Australia right now, that overseas migrant work is primarily aimed at providing labour that the home country, the receiving country, cannot provide for itself. It's occasionally presented as being a system of providing income for people in poorer countries, but I think our experience with COVID-19 has taught us that this is not the primary goal of migrant worker programs. So welcome, Peter, and I'd like to begin by asking you, is that a reasonable assessment, do you think, of the situation of migrant workers?
Good morning, Jim. Thank you for inviting me to be interviewed, and also a warm welcome to our viewers for the interview. Yes, what you said is very accurate. From my experience of working in Taiwan for many years, the migrant workers come into Taiwan as temporary migrant workers. They can enter the country for a contract of 3 years, which can be renewed for another 3 years to a maximum of 12 years if you're working in the manufacturing sector, or to a maximum of 14 years if you are a domestic worker. So their visa is tied to their employer. So they are very vulnerable to abuse in the workplace. Not stating that all migrant workers are abused. There are quite a number of migrant workers who have very good employers and they are happy with their work. But from my experience of working at the Columban Hope Worker Centre and at the Hsinchu Diocese Migrants and Immigrant Service Centre over a period of 26 years, we assisted many migrant workers who came to those two centres with complaints in the workplace.
Now, in your time in Taiwan, you had the opportunity and I suppose the privilege of attending meetings of the International Labour Organization, which wrote a Charter of Rights, firstly for domestic workers, even domestic workers in their own country, and also for migrant workers. Do you think that that charter, which was drawn up by the International Labour Organization, did it have any impact on the condition under which people were employed or the way that they were treated?
I went to the International Labour Conference in 2010 and 2011, representing the Migrant Forum in Asia. The Hope Worker Centre was a founding member of the Migrant Forum in Asia in 1994. And at that time, for 6 years, I was also on the executive committee of the Migrant Forum in Asia. And in 2011, the International Labour Organization's Convention on Decent Work for Domestic Workers was passed. Unfortunately, not too many countries at the moment have ratified that convention. So in the case of Australia, Australia has not ratified the convention, and Taiwan, it is not a member of the International Labour Organization, so it's not able to ratify the convention. However, when I returned to Taiwan and participated in many government meetings, I would bring to the table this convention which had been passed at the International Labour Organization and encourage the Taiwan government to implement this convention in developing a household service act that would protect the rights of domestic workers. Up until now in Taiwan, the Migrant Empowerment Network Taiwan, which is a coalition of faith-based and civil society organizations advocating for the rights of migrant workers, are still in constant dialogue with the Taiwan government to implement the Household Service Act. So even though we can have an international law, which is waiting to be ratified, because you need a certain number of countries to ratify the international law before it becomes, before it can be implemented, we have for many years encouraged the Taiwan government to look at the international standards with regards to protecting the rights of domestic workers.
Now in Taiwan, Peter, the local church seems to have been quite active in the work of defending or helping migrant workers. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
In the diocese where I worked, with the Hsinchu diocese, which is 1 hour south of the capital Taipei, the local bishop, Bishop John Baptist Lee, has always been very supportive of the work to migrant workers. In the diocese, there are 3 migrant centres, and the Columbans were very involved in setting up these centres. The Columbans founded the Hope Worker Centre in 1986. Columban Father Peter Nguyen Van Hung was the founder and still the director of the Vietnamese Migrant Workers Centre in the diocese. And as a Columban, I helped to establish the Hsinchu Diocese Migrants and Immigrant Service Centre. Father Eamon Sheridan, a Columban who is now working in Taiwan, was the director of the centre for 4 years and also the chaplain to migrants and immigrants in the diocese. And when Eamon was elected onto the General Council, the Bishop asked me to replace Eamon as the director. So I was the director for 10 years. So the local church in that sense, through the direction of the Bishop, has always been very supportive of the work to migrants, immigrants and trafficked peoples, by the fact that there are 3 centres in the diocese that provide education, legal aid, support, shelter for abused migrant workers and victims of human trafficking, as well as pastoral assistance to migrant workers who are Catholic.
Now that's a fairly broad spectrum of services that you were providing. So can we conclude from that that the type of problems that migrant workers encountered was a fairly broad spectrum of problems?
Yeah, migrant workers would come to our centres, many of them regarding non-payment of salaries or underpayment of salaries. There would be workers coming who were victims of occupational accidents in the workplace, domestic workers who came to our centres who were victims of sexual abuse or physical abuse in their workplace. There were, we worked closely with the local county governments and the local police and the federal police in assisting victims of human trafficking. The majority of the victims were migrant domestic workers, female, who had come into Taiwan as regular migrant workers. Because of abuse in the workplace, they ran away from their regular work and became irregular migrant workers, and they were lured into the sex industry. And when they were rescued by the police would call us asking if we would be able to shelter the women. So in the diocese, there are 5 shelters, 3 for women migrants and 2 for male migrants. And we would assist these workers to find work, to go through the legal procedure in seeking a pro bono lawyer to help them with their case against the trafficker. We provide them with counselling. So there's a whole gamut of services that we would provide the workers. We also assisted a number of fishermen who were working on fishing boats out of Taiwan ports, but the number of workers in that sector is quite small.
Now, you said in the past that you think many of these problems were escalated with the introduction of the labour broker, the agencies which companies contract in order to procure, I presume, a certain number of workers to work in a certain type of industry or for a particular company in their factory. And you said that is the beginning of the disempowerment to a large extent of the people who are migrating. How does that brokerage system work? And how does it work, or does it work particularly against the interests of the migrant and in favour of the company or in favour of the brokerage agency?
The brokerage system or the agencies, they begin in the country of origin. So the migrant workers going to Taiwan to work only come from 4 countries: the Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. So they go to an employment agency in the country of origin to apply for a job. There is a lot of competition. They need to pay a placement fee to the agency. There are legal placement fees set down by the country of origin. Unfortunately, many migrant workers pay in excess of the legal fee. And then when the workers arrive in Taiwan, the Taiwan government has a brokerage system where an employer in Taiwan who wants to employ a migrant domestic worker or employ a migrant worker to work in the industrial sector, then they would go to a brokerage and they would arrange for the employer to employ a migrant worker. And then the migrant worker needs to pay a fee to the broker, so does the employer.
So the exploitation really begins at home, before you even depart from your home country to the country where you're going to work.
Oh yes, from my experience, there's a lot of problems with migrant workers paying in excessive placement fees in their country of origin. So that's where the abuse starts, and that's where the debt bondage starts.
And so they already arrive with a debt, and that debt has to be paid back, right?
That's correct.
And so in a sense, they're indentured to their job, because if they don't work, they can't repay the debt. And I presume the debt is at such a level that they couldn't possibly earn that amount of money and pay it back working in their home country, even if they could get a job there.
No, the placement fee is a fairly high placement fee. For example, the Vietnamese workers pay the highest, and that is $4,000. That was up until 2017, and that regulation was imposed by the Vietnamese government and approved by the Taiwan government. The lowest placement fees, the Filipinos, they pay about $1,800. So the workers come, and if they are abused in the workplace, they have to make a decision. If I come forward to file a complaint to the government about my abuse, then I may be without work for a considerable period of time, depending on what's happening with my case. And so most often migrant workers wait until they have paid back their placement debt before they come forward to file a case of abuse.
Now, approximately how many months' salary would that be for an average migrant worker in Taiwan?
I would say for a Vietnamese worker, they could be working for a good 1.5 years to 2 years before they pay back the debt, because it's not paying back. They're not just paying the debt, the placement fee debt. They also have to pay the monthly fee to the Taiwan broker. They have to pay for their room and board. They have to pay for their health insurance. So they have to pay their tax. So I would say for a Vietnamese worker, they could be spending about a year and a half. For the other workers, about a year by the time they pay their debt.
Approximately 50% of their contract.
Yes.
About half the money they will earn in Taiwan goes in the fee to get there.
Yes.
And then after that, they're arguably making a little bit of money.
That's true. And a lot of workers who are working in the manufacturing sector rely on doing overtime work in order to receive extra money to pay back their debts.
Now, you've been back in Australia for the past 2 or 3 years, and during that time, you've been connected with the...
Yes, ACRAF.
Yeah.
Australian Catholic
Religious. What is ACRAF? That's an acronym. What does it stand for?
It stands for Australian Catholic Religious Against Trafficking in Humans. and it was founded in 2004 by a number of religious congregations here in Australia.
And through your involvement with that organisation, you've had exposure to various difficulties that migrant workers coming to Australia from Timor-Leste, from Vanuatu, I think.
Yes.
And mostly from the islands in the Pacific. Some from China have been coming to Australia and found to be being exploited by their employers or underpaid or forced to live in fairly rough and primitive conditions and being radically overcharged for their board that they have to pay. Could you speak to some of the things that you've encountered during your time of involvement with that?
Yes, as a representative of ACRAF, I've been assisting a group of 22 workers from Vanuatu who came into Australia in 2014 under the Australian Government Seasonal Worker Program to pick fruit on farms in the northern part of Australia in Queensland. And they worked for 7 weeks for a labour hire provider, and they didn't receive their salary. And so this case was brought forward to the Australian government. And then in July 2018, I went to Bundaberg in northern Queensland to visit 2 of the workers who had returned for a second time to work for another employer. And these workers gave permission for ACRAF to work on their behalf to see what was happening with their case. And in March 2017, the judge made the decision that the labour hire provider was to pay the workers their unpaid salaries totaling 80,000 Australian dollars. And with many 7 enforcement hearings in court, the labour hire provider only paid the workers $490. So with the assistance of pro bono lawyers here in Australia, ACRAF have been given permission to be the representatives of these 22 workers to go forward to the Australian government to apply for an act of grace payment. So this is a technical legal procedure, and we hope that the Australian government will give due justice to these workers who have been waiting now for 7 years to receive their unpaid salaries. So that's required a lot of work and time on my behalf, and having regular meetings with the government through phone calls, and also doing advocacy work as a member of the ACRAF's advocacy team. We go to Canberra once a year to have meetings with politicians.
Now, Peter, you've been back in Australia for 4 years, and currently you're part of the leadership in the country. So could you expand a little bit on what are the various activities that the Columbans are involved in here?
As the Columban leader in Australia, I work closely with our leadership team. There are 2 other priests on the leadership team, and my office is based here at our Columban Mission Centre in Essendon. Here at Essendon, we work on publishing our Far East magazine, our Columban calendar. We work closely with our supporters, families and friends, inviting them to journey with us and to support our Columban work overseas with people in the 16 countries where we work. In Sydney, we have our Centre for Christian-Muslim Relations, the Columban Centre, and we have the centre there does fantastic work in the area of interreligious dialogue, reaching out to the Muslim communities in Sydney. And recently in March, they launched the Sydney Statement, which is a statement on building bridges between people of different faiths. In other parts of Australia, we have priests working in spiritual direction, working in the area of faith and ecology, working in parishes to assist the priests when they go on holidays. We also have 2 of our priests who are working as chaplains for Catholic high schools. We have a priest who is a parish priest. And we also work very closely with our co-workers here in Australia. who provide their professional skills in all the areas that I've mentioned just now.
And I think too, providing support for people working overseas, and also giving people in Australia an opportunity to learn more about situations in other countries. And we know that we're called, all of us, to be missionary in our lives, and having an understanding of that is a fairly important thing. And I think one of the important things that you achieve is giving people an opportunity to learn more through the Far East magazine and other resources that we produce, and also to give support both financially, concretely, and also concretely through their prayer and knowing and understanding something about overseas mission.
Yes, that's true. In October of last year, we celebrated the 100th anniversary of the Far East magazine, which is a wonderful resource and gives education to our benefactors on the situation of the countries and the people where our Columban missionaries are working. And next year, we will be celebrating the 100th anniversary of our Columban art calendar. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our Columban supporters, family and friends for their financial support and their prayers over the last 100 years. Last year we celebrated the 100th anniversary. No, this year is the 100th anniversary of the Columbans arriving here in Melbourne.
Okay, Peter, thank you very much. And I'd really like to thank you for giving us your time and sharing the benefits of your wisdom and expertise. Peter is a local boy. He comes from Geelong, and one of his other great passions in life is the local football team, the Cats from that area. So Peter, we wish you a blessed year and also lots of enjoyment from watching your favourite football team.
Thanks very much, Jim.
We've been talking with Peter O'Neill, who is the leader of the Columbans in Australia, and thank you very much for being with us, Peter.